most oftentimes, as I was reminded in that book, your competition is not the other people making toothbrushes so much as like, why should I change my toothbrush? So it's doing nothing. And that can be a really hard barrier to overcome. This week, we wanted to make space for a topical conversation. And I just want to lead off by saying that even though we are going to talk about some facts laid out in a framework, this is an opinion based discussion. So the goal is to expand our lens in the spirit of mutual learning. And every community member's thoughts and experience are valuable and should be treated with equal respect. As many of you likely know, Spencer and I came to know each other through MIT's Global Entrepreneurship Bootcamp, which is based on the Disciplined Entrepreneurship framework created by Bill Aulet. As he defines it in Disciplined Entrepreneurship, market segmentation and the 24 steps are a systematic and rigorous framework for building new innovation based ventures. So I did list out the 24 steps here. I don't think I need to go through them completely. But do you want to just kick us off with a short definition of market segmentation, Spencer?
Oh, absolutely. I've written down sort of my own definition. We can also go through the book later if that's interesting. But market segmentation is the process of separating out small target audiences who share a problem you're looking to solve. In the disciplined entrepreneurship framework, you don't even have specific product necessarily yet. You're just looking at the set of markets that you might be targeting.
And I was telling Spencer before we started recording that I did go back and reread the chapter in Disciplined Entrepreneurship on market segmentation because I felt like I really needed a refresher. And I thought it was so, interesting. And I remembered he kicks off saying, Bill Aulet kicks off saying, a business is defined by having a paying customer, not by having a good idea or having great marketing or having a great color scheme or anything else, just by having a paying customer.
Not even a logo.
Yeah, or even a logo, even though I made that very important to me when I started my business. But very true. And so, like you're saying, they must have things in common. So he said they must have three things in common. They must buy the same product, they must buy it the same way. So, for the same use case, and there must be word of mouth between them. So, we kind of want to talk about this step because when we ask people, is there part of the disciplined entrepreneurship framework that you still find useful? When we ask that in interviews, we get the answer very often that it's not so much market segmentation itself, it is, but the market research, the actual going out and talking to people that is really kind of been transformative for some of the entrepreneurs we've talked to. So we thought maybe we would give some famous examples of wins and flops and then go into this a little bit deeper. The flops are more interesting, but I will talk about the good ones first because I did find these more interesting than I thought. So, a few small companies that are often cited as examples of successfully utilizing market research. There are definitely some big ones, but some small ones include Dollar Shave Club. And as soon as I heard this, I was like, oh, yeah. And I know for people not in a US audience, this is probably going to be a little more US focused. So please, I would love to hear examples of wins and flops from other countries too. So essentially, Dollar Shave Club leveraged online surveys and social media to really understand their customers' needs. Warby Parker conducted really in depth research to refine and design their pricing. Airbnb, which I think they are international, like huge time, right? Like they're in a lot of different markets.
Yeah.
They're pretty famous for using data analysis to identify market gaps and tailor their performance. And the Honest Company, which is like a health and beauty care company,
I don't think I've actually heard of them, the Honest Company.
believe, if I'm getting this right, that's the one that Jessica Alba started.
Ah,
But they wanted to make like all natural health and beauty care products. So relying on customer feedback to develop products that align with their target audience's values. And I think the key takeaways there for me are that that process never stops. Like you identify your customer, but then you continue to do those surveys, you continue to have those conversations, because I think that's pretty obvious when you look at like, and again, I think these are the big US flops, but they're not small companies. They're small companies that didn't do well introducing new products. Companies often cited as examples of failing due to poor market research include Kodak, who really missed the digital camera revolution despite developing the first one. And I actually did a bit of reading about them because just having a photography background, I was sort of curious. They did do a lot of market research and they ignored it. They decided that they were going to save money by staying in film. And clearly they were wrong. But I just thought that was so interesting that they took the time and energy to do market research and they just decided to ignore it and go on their hunches.
sorry. So, as in, did the market research advise that they do it, and they were like,
Yeah.
actually,
Yes. Yes.
wow,
If a big company can just say, we're going to go on a hunch, which I guess happens all the time, then as the little guy that I see myself, can be guilty of that too. So Blockbuster was video movie store in the US, and they really failed to adapt to streaming services when video rental was their primary business, whereas Netflix famously was known in the US as just, like they'll send you 5 DVDs. You just have this whole list of movies and they'll send you some of them to watch. So they were just like a video rental service and they completely changed their business model. Blockbuster really held on to their physical product in stores. Polaroid is on here. I think it's interesting because I feel like Polaroid actually has come back and found their niche market. And as I was reading in Bill Aulet's book, like he said, some of the most interesting markets when you're brainstorming exist on kind of like the fringe. So you really want to expand your lens and think about where you're going to expand to. It might be a niche. So even though Polaroid didn't adapt digitally, I really feel like they did find one of those fringe markets at this point because they have come back quite a bit.
that's a good point.
Maybe just not where they were.
Maybe. I think a thing that's valuable about this process of market segmentation is finding the particular market that you can dominate in instead of just like taking a piece of a market. So in Bill Aulet's book, he talks about the example, which I'm sure everyone remembers, of a toothbrush, selling a toothbrush to China and just getting 0.1% of the market. And it's like, oh, we'll make so much money. And it's like, sure, but that means that you are always in this constant competition.
Mhm.
And then Peter Thiel actually says a similar thing where he says he advocates for a niche business approach over a general business strategy almost all the time. He says this allows to avoid competition, allows you to start small and scale up. You can, if you identify the niche market, then you can really focus on that small group of particular people whose problem you're facing. You approach with monopoly as a goal within that small market. And then if you're using contrarian thinking, which this often is, it means that no one else is sort of ready to catch up to you because they're all thinking things will go a very different way. I think that's interesting. Should I talk about my particular example?
Yeah, and just before you do, you kind of brought to mind too that like sometimes, most oftentimes, as I was reminded in that book, your competition is not the other people making toothbrushes so much as like, why should I change my toothbrush? So it's doing nothing.
Absolutely.
And that can be a really hard barrier to overcome. Yeah, that would be great if you want to share your example.
Yeah, absolutely. As some of you will know, I started a business a number of years ago now called Unseen Games. The focus of the business was developing a video game console for pubs and cafes. Pubs are different in the UK than I think pretty much anywhere else in that they're like really center point of all socialization to a degree. And so we wanted to make it so that anyone could walk into a pub with a smartphone and have access to a bunch of social games on their phone there. So we're like, oh, this solves problems of like destroyed board games or video game consoles because everyone's using their own phone, and it solves problems of restricting people to that Wi-Fi network so they can't pretend to be there, which is one of the things that happened with Pokemon Go. But I got very excited by the idea. I started, as is very common in engineers, started just developing the idea, working on it, got a small team of engineers together, got something together really interesting, really successful in the sense of whenever we play tested with players, they were like, this is great. I love this. There's a huge amount of fun. I can really see myself picking it up whilst at a pub, all that sort of stuff. So we were like, this is really positive playtesting. But, and this is something that Bill Aulet points out in the book, your main user is not always your economic buyer. So our economic buyer was the pub owner and our main user was the player. And so we did a bunch of market research on the player and we did very limited market research on the pub owner or the economic buyer. And so this ended up when we were ready to start putting our device into locations, this ended up with suddenly having the experience of what we should have been researching from the very beginning of they A, don't really trust technology, B, are struggling just after COVID and don't want to put out money elsewhere, and C, they're much more comfortable with bringing things into their pubs that directly put money out. So we had too tentative of a connection between play and like use of the device and their actual income. And so long story short, basically, that lack of market research meant that we spent a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of money developing Unseen Games and came to the conclusion that actually it's not something that the economic buyer we were targeting is interested in. So that's the story of an unsuccessful situation, unfortunately.
What do you think you, at this point, like kind of take away from that? I appreciate the way in which you're able to talk about, what actually happened.
What my key takeaway would be is, and this is something that I'd read before starting Unseen Games, but the key takeaway is do your market research at the very beginning and make sure you deeply understand the market you're targeting or the markets that you're targeting. In our case, we did parts of the research looking that there was interest for users and didn't properly do the research of the economic buyer, the pub owners. And so that would be something that I'd focus on really in particular, especially with two-sided markets like that. You want to make sure that you are a fully engaging and understanding the economic buyer as well as the user.
Sure. Yeah, because you may decide to make your business model different,
Yeah.
even if you don't make your product different. That makes a lot of sense. I really appreciate you sharing that. Hi there. If you're enjoying this podcast, would you mind leaving us a review, a like, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform? Thanks so much. That really helps our reach. The Founders Voyage podcast is now proudly sponsored by VidOps. Kane at VidOps has been taking care of our editing since early 2024. He works efficiently, and I'm sure you'll agree that he does a great job. Thank you to VidOps for helping bring this podcast to life. If you want the same great support we're getting for your podcast, or you need help with video, photography, or animation, you can get 10% off at vidops.io using our referral code Voyage. That's vidops.io, referral code Voyage. Now back to the show. And I know I told you this the other day. It does remind me a little bit of like Bree's story. And I'm guessing that most people that went to the boot camp already like know that story. But I just found it so fascinating that they came up with such a great product. And this is the long version. And I feel like if I tell totally, I'm going to tell it poorly. Most people that went to basically when they chose to engage in market research, it was too late. Their launch had failed and cost the company hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. So they started observing the people that were using their product when they were using it, because it was essentially a product, like it was unscented and it would eliminate odor, which sounds like a miracle. But people didn't have a use case for it in their lives. And they started seeing people using it as this finishing spray, like after they had cleaned. And so then they realized, like, we could make this scented, like we need to market this completely differently. And I mean, it's such a successful product now. And when I buy them, I do smell them, like so clearly, like that that target audience really opened up a broader use case for it. And you have all these other products on the market very similar to it, but it's just so interesting that, like, you have to understand. And actually, there's a comment on the questions and discussion channel. I'm curious about how cognitive biases play a role in people ignoring research data like Kodak and others. And I mean, I think it's a good point. I mean, in the case of Kodak, I think they had been used to doing things the same way for so long. So that makes a lot of sense to me as far as behavior change science goes. It's really hard to tell yourself that you need a new way to solve a problem. And sometimes, like, I totally get how it could be too late for a company, because even, I work, in like a healthcare adjacent industry. And unfortunately, it's not when people can't climb the stairs, maybe, that they always are like, I need to take care of my health. It's when they have a heart attack. And even then, sometimes that's not enough. So, like, it's hard for us as humans to really acknowledge, like, maybe there's something I have to take responsibility for and change if I want a different outcome. It doesn't surprise me that big companies have the same problem, because then if you have a group of people endorsing the lack of change, how is it going to happen? And then the other comment says, I also wonder how well we understand the jobs to be done when people are hiring a product, service, experience to accomplish versus the functional aspects and ignoring the other aspects, social or emotional aspects. I don't know. I might need a little bit of clarification on that. Feels like we're attacking a couple things at once there.
So I'll give you an example. I mean, this is a famous example. So McDonald's, as a behavioral study, they said, why are people buying only milkshakes in the morning to drive through? And so they had this research or survey person stand outside and like, hey, why did you buy only a milkshake, to stop the car driver? And they're like, well, obviously there's the functional aspect, which is, it fills me up, right? Rather than a coffee or something. But what they realized was that these people typically drive at least half an hour to an hour. So they're number one, commuters. And what you experience as a commuter, you have nothing better to do during your commute. And so instead of a coffee or tea, the viscosity of the milkshake gave them something to do. Then there was the other aspect of, well, if I drink a coffee in my hour-long drive, do I need to use the washroom halfway? And so not only does it fulfill a functional aspect, but it also fulfills other aspects that you typically do not necessarily think of. So in the case of, using Kodak as an example, is it actually, what are they selling or what are you hiring Kodak to do? You're really hiring Kodak to create memories, not photographs, right? So in that sense, I do wonder if they missed the boat because, and I mean, if you look at their marketing material, they talk about memories, they talk about all these different things, emotional and nice feeling good stuff. But did they actually really take it to heart in, are they an engineering company, a film company, or whatever they call themselves? A lot of it, while you can say it's brand positioning and all that, at the core, I don't feel like they necessarily understood, at least from a leadership perspective, where they were and where they needed to go. So from an executive level, I do wonder if there was a lot of disconnect, particularly when you are such a large company. Hope that makes sense.
I think it makes a lot of sense. And also, like in the case of, I'm a little bit closer to this just because I was going through photography school as we were starting to go into the digital transition. And the camera I was set up with was a medium format film camera, which became obsolete. I don't know, maybe in like within 5 years of that. You can get film for it, but it's harder to get someone to develop it for you. So I think that also the resistance of that community of aging photographers to making that transition and trading out all this equipment, I could see how that could feed their hunch. You know what I mean? Even though they should have been looking at the future, and that whole kind of like social, emotional relationship that they had with, putting out products for professionals because they did chemicals for labs as well, so it wasn't just the place that you could send, your film to, but they were, they had all sorts of supplies. It would have been a very big switch for them to go completely digital. I mean, I think they have at this point, but
Yeah, if I can add to that too, if at that time, what were the big players? There was Kodak, there was Fuji, and then I think there was Minolta and some other tinier ones. But then, let's take a few steps back here because really at the heart of it, we're exploring market segmentation, right? So we're really looking at market segmentation and the history. How did photography come about? It was in the old days when they didn't have photography, what were they doing? They were painting, right? They were painting, drawing, and all sorts of expression of the visual arts. And so then there was this whole aspect of photography as art as well, right? And the ability to capture an image and the representation of what that looks like. And so then we go into low fidelity, high fidelity, and then the resistance, right? Because they had the entire market in all of the aspects, right? The chemicals, the machines, the processing, the film, the cameras, projectors. Remember the days of those colored slides?
mhm.
They were like, this is not just photography. This is art. There was such perhaps, and this is just purely my perspective, I find like there was a lot of different voices and different opinions on who thought what it was. And so, did they truly, because while the research showed what it showed, did they truly agree on what was important? And how might that actually take the company to where it should be? And then another big flop was BlackBerry, right, from Canada. Same thing. They missed the mark. Same thing with Google. Google missed the mark with Facebook. And then, of course, now with AI. And then Microsoft is obviously capitalizing and all that. So lots of people are missing the mark even today.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, and I think it can be a physical product. It doesn't have to be a service, but that emotional relationship you have with it and with the buying process is so important. And I think when you have a great idea, that's not your first thing you think of, which is why this is the first step, for kind of like taking your product through the filter in the book. I think I get that now because for me, I would say it was always fear of doing that market research. I'm someone that's gotten very comfortable talking to people and have worked in call centers, but when you're talking about your baby, it just feels so different. And the scariest question for me starting Starfish Strength really was like, how much are you willing to pay me? But you need to know that once you've given them a sample and once you've taken them, kind of through what you're thinking and you've asked them, about all these changes, you need to figure out like what you're going to charge. And we talked to Inshallah about Multiply, and she was talking about that. And that made me feel so seen that she was like, yeah, I had to ask my customers like what they wanted to pay me. It's an important question, but it was a scary one for me. I can see a million different barriers because you're emotionally attached to this product and you want your customers to be. and you need to help them put a number on like an abstract value, that they have for this. It's not just the value of using that toothbrush, but it's like, how does it make me feel when I see my toothbrush and it's got like, these stripes up the side and like part of it's rubber and, like, does it make me feel like I'm going to do great in this interview because I'm going to have clean teeth, like it's beyond the product itself somehow.
Yeah, absolutely. And understanding that as an entrepreneur is key. Understanding like your product isn't, like Andrew was saying, your Kodak's cameras aren't a physical product. They're not selling the ability to make photos. They're selling the ability to store memories. If, your teeth is a major concern in your head of like, am I presentable? Then that's like, you're solving that anxiety. A lot of entrepreneurs need to develop the ability to understand what they're actually targeting. That's really, really key.
So market leaders, people who end up becoming market leaders, either take over, case in point, as an example, Friendster was actually the first social media platform, but Friendster is nowhere to be found, or a very niche type of thing. And then Facebook took over. But the investment and the overwhelming amount of effort, money, time, resources, etc., to develop the entire markets, and which they did or took over from whoever started it, probably what, millions, billions of dollars. And so from that perspective, from a behavioral perspective, because they've invested such an exponential amount of money, the concept of a sunk cost fallacy, which is basically, because I've already invested so much time, effort, money, and everything else in between, I'm not willing to change, despite what the market data tells me. And so I think it really bears. And so, now I consult for industry and all that, and of course do it corporately for my work. It bears asking the question, yes, we did all this, but where is, in ice hockey, they say, skate to where the puck is going to be, not where the puck is. Then the question that really needs to be asked is, are we overly invested in our existing direction versus where the market is going to be?
Absolutely. I think that's a really good point in regards to aiming for the future of your industry. What is it going to be? Where is the puck going to be? Not where is it currently? I think that's really, really good.
Yeah, and I think that that can be a scary thing for companies to think about if they're really in love with the present too, kind of going back to our other example. If it's okay, I'm gonna just pass to Giovanni, who I think has a really good question.
Thank you, Nancy. I would want to make this question for everyone. That is, what are, in your opinion, budget-friendly ways early stage startups can test their assumptions about a segment?
I think that's a really great question. I think there's going to be tons of answers that are depending on the particular segment you're looking at. One of the easy ones is to go to locations where your audience potentially is, walk the street with, a handwritten survey and ask people questions, just like we did at the boot camp, getting out there and asking people on the street to give their perspective to you on what you're talking about, on the problem you're talking about. I should also add, not on the solution you've come up with. So, for example, if you're targeting people who skateboard, then go to like somewhere, a skate ring. Is that the right word? Rink?
We usually call
Skate,
them skate parks in the US, but you
skate
can
park,
call it
we'll say
whatever you
that.
want.
And ask people there because they're relevant to you. The more relevant to this target audience that you're looking at, the more important it is to get their perspective. Nancy, do you have ideas of other ways?
Sure. I mean, I definitely will say, as far as I'm going to take this question a little bit deeper in a second, but so as far as the means in which to find your target audience, I think you're right. Physically going to places during the early days of the pandemic, that was definitely difficult. So I think finding Facebook groups was helpful and posting surveys. But I do feel like one on one conversations were necessary in order for people to even value testing what you wanted them to test, reading what you wanted them to read, and giving you feedback. In my case, I actually did like a free virtual training session with people who were and were not previously my clients, and then surveyed them because I just wanted to test it with as large of an audience as I could. But I will also say that, like, the other thing is that your time, especially as an entrepreneur who has to do kind of everything and wear all the hats, what is that worth? Because market research is something that big companies often outsource. And I'm not saying that that's right, and it doesn't always happen, but this is where I think the cautioning in the book about don't have too much fun with spreadsheets. Don't just look at statistics all day and think that those are real people, because those cannot replace like the conversations that you have with people one on one. And I will say for myself, as someone who, we've talked about imposter syndrome and stuff, who had some serious self doubt, I was trying to figure out, like, why is what I'm doing valuable? Like, there are all these other like ways in which people could go about this. Like, why are my former clients coming to me and saying, like, you need to start doing this? I want you to offer this. If you don't understand like what your secret sauce is, how can you replicate it? So I kind of felt like there was some reverse engineering that I needed to do. That did take more time, and time is money when you're trying to start a business, but it was worth it.
On top of your answer, I'll just add two things in regards to Facebook groups. I think Reddit's also a really good option that's very similar, where you have like a collection of people with a shared interest. So I think they're sort of quite similar in that regard. And we've got someone listening saying they agree with Reddit. And then the other thing is another method, if this is an option for you, and it may not be, but if you can find someone who's an expert in that field and who is willing to give you, say, 2.5 hours of their time, and you can really drill deep into the topic, then it means you're getting less perspectives, which is maybe slight risk, but it also means you're getting an expert's perspective, which is super high value. So that would be another way. And a lot of experts, in my experience at least, are very willing to give you a bit of their time if you ask really nicely, maybe take them out for lunch.
Talking to other people in your industry and getting ideas, how you might want to go about your market research. Sometimes it's a cautionary tale of what you might not want to do as well. But I think, like, when you do find people that you start considering, like, I really did like feel like I did it backwards. I was like, this was my beachhead market and I already did this. What do these people have in common? Like, how is it that I'm interacting with them that works? And I think I'm still working on trying to find the next market beyond that, which is really important because, like, you attract, and someone said this to me early on in sales. I went to boot camp, like, you attract customers that are somewhat like you personality wise. And that's really true. Certain parts of your personality you want to capitalize on because they're going to bring in customers that you really like.
Absolutely. And so at the end of this step in the disciplined entrepreneurship framework, the book says you want to be having between 6 and 12 different markets that you think are potential markets for you. And then the next step 2, is selecting your beachhead market. Nancy, do you think we have a bit of time to go into that as well? How you deselect markets?
I did write that as a note, like, selecting your market also means deselecting other markets, because I think that that is another trap and that is a trap that I have found myself in, just wanting to help everybody. And if you spread yourself that thin, you're not going to be really good at doing this for a target market. You just can't be, because you're just trying to please anyone that comes your way. And in fact, in the book, there was caution in this chapter about just taking on the first customer that comes your way. And I can say, as soon as I like became a personal trainer, I was like, I'll take anybody. And I learned eventually, okay, this is not my ideal customer, but unless you open yourself to that, I can't also see that other side to it. But I think it's interesting. I'm gonna just pass to Daiki, who has something he wants to share.
Thank you so much for having this talk. Really, really helpful. My name is Daiki. I also participated in MIT Bootcamp before. I'm currently in grad school and I'm working on a startup idea to help people with depression. And we're exactly doing market segmentation and also PMR at the same time. I completed around 25 PMRs with people who experience depression, burnout, and similar mental illnesses. However, I think we are a little bit lost about what kind of market we're focusing on. The market that we have right now is people, white collar workers living in city area, aged 20 to 40. We made it broad, so our target total addressable market would be around 50 million USD. But I think we are thinking of either making it more specific with the risk of narrowing down the TAM or make it geographically agnostic because we're currently focusing on Japanese market, but sort of opening up to East Asia market and still sort of narrow down the target segment. And I want everyone's sort of opinions or thoughts on how sort of we can improve our target segment or market segmentation.
Yeah, that I think it's such a wonderful issue that you want to help tackle. I think the first thing that came to my mind is like what we were talking about earlier about like experiencing it in the same way because depression to me when you say the word I feel like it encompasses so much. Between 20 and 40, there's so many big life changes you go through too. I mean, just really specifically having a couple of people in my network, like postpartum depression is like a whole avenue, right? Or like coming out of school. And actually, this is an area of interest. I just thought of someone I could connect you with, but coming out of school and being like, now I have this degree, I have to pay for it, what am I going to do? Like, is this the right career for me? Is this like that is such a big, transition getting through that. And then there comes this point, where you're like, I feel like I should be at maybe this is around 40. I feel like I should be somewhere in my career. Am I there? Do I need to go back to school? But there are certain, I feel like maybe milestones where people are experiencing things in somewhat of a similar way. So that was the first thing that came to my mind. I don't know if that's something that you've asked about. There just I think there's so many market research questions you could ask about this market. I can absolutely understand why it's hard to narrow it down.
Yeah, a lot of what Nancy said is on the money. Depression is obviously to some degree a shared experience, but the source of it, where it's coming from, can be so different. As Nancy said, people who are going through like postpartum depression, that's a very different things that you need to do to sort of help them through that experience versus the recent graduates. And I'm sure there's other ways you could cut that up. To me, it feels like you do want to cut up the market a bit more and narrow in on a space. But I would also say if you think that when you do that, and then you look at outside of Japan, there's a lot of people that have sort of that same experience. So they're still shared experience, but they're sort of not quite geographically shared location. You can probably then expand it a bit more in that regard. If you are worried about the TAM being too small, would be my thoughts. Andrew had a question of who's the end user profile and persona?
That's a good question. We don't have the persona, but we do have end user profile. End user profile, we don't have specific gender, but someone aged 20 to 40 working at a professional service firm, seniority from analyst level to manager level, income is average income. So in Japan, converting to US figure, it's around 32K to 45K USD. Education, I would say second tier universities, but aspire to go to top tier university. Other personalities, sort of perfectionist, have this pressure to succeed, have pressure to please others, tend to overthink. I think we are targeting East Asian people. So I think personality, there's a strong connection to East Asian culture.
Thanks for sharing that, if I may. add to that point what Nancy had shared earlier. She said that 20 to 40 is a really big age range and that encompasses multiple life stages. And so, yes, demographic information is important, but ultimately, I do think the psychographic aspects are going to be potentially even more important because a 20-year-old is just starting out. At a bachelor's level, they may or may not necessarily go into grad school. And then when you get into your late 30s, late 20s, early 30s, you might be thinking of having a family or not. You may be thinking about other different things, maybe living the single life. And then when you're 40, or late 30s, you're thinking about very, very different things. So I do wonder if there's an opportunity for you to actually also look at above and beyond the hard metrics of the demographics, look more into the psychographic aspects because those are going to be more valuable in terms of helping you further define your market segments.
When you say psychographic aspects, so it's more of like, the source of depression or.
No, more so about like, why do I think what I think? What motivates me? Why do I care about what I care about? All the things. So the way I think about demographics versus psychographics, demographics are the hard facts that you can that are observable, that you can see and define as somebody walking down the street. The psychographics are the invisible things, the intangible things about how they feel, what they think, who they hang out with that are less tangible, and you actually have to do a lot more digging to understand.
Thanks so much.
What I think is so great about this too is like understanding those things will not just help you like understand your target market that you want to start with, but it's going to help you better address your problem too. Like the more you understand about the social structure, your customers, clients, whatever you decide to call them, find themselves in, the better off you'll be suited to help them. I mean, I love this topic for a whole bunch of different reasons. And yeah, I look forward to hearing how this is going for you. And feel free, because we are going to wrap up here pretty soon, but please feel free to just ping Spencer or myself if you're like, I've been thinking about this, and do we know anyone who's done something like this? Because we may know some people that we can connect you with that, not that are doing the same exact idea, but might be decent enough that it might lend you some ideas. But yeah, I'm so excited for you. Congratulations on starting this idea.
Yeah, thank you absolutely for bringing the question to us.
And if this is a desire, that we go through other steps in the Disciplined Entrepreneurship book, we could definitely do that. Or if there's another topic kind of, tangentially related to this one that came up for you, please let us know because we are going to try to do a topical discussion once a month. There's definitely a lot of space for us to have group conversations, that kind of leave us all feeling more inspired and better suited to walk back into our projects.
Yeah, absolutely. And to sort of turn the market research around on you guys, if you could post, as Hassan has just like your perspective on this session today, and if there are other steps that you'd like to go through, we'd love to hear it.
Absolutely. Thank you all for joining us today. Spencer and I and the rest of the Founders Voyage feel really fortunate to be part of this community with you. And we really do look forward to bringing you mutual learning sessions each week. And that is really how I see interview sessions that we've had the honor to do. So I do hope, that you enjoy listening to the podcast. And I do hope that you join us again for a live session as you're available. So thank you so much again, everyone, and a wonderful day ahead.
You've just finished another episode of Founders Voyage, the podcast for entrepreneurs by entrepreneurs. The team at Founders Voyage wants to thank you from the bottom of our hearts. We hope you enjoyed your time with us, and if so, please share this with someone else who might enjoy this podcast. You can also support us by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and by donating to our Patreon. Outro music today is Something for Nothing by Reverend Peyton's Big Damn Band.